The cold comes before anything else. It comes before thought, before memory, before the first thin light finds the gap in the thatch above. It settles into the joints first, the knuckles, the knees, the place where the shoulder meets the neck, and it waits there like a creditor, patient, certain of payment. He does not open his eyes immediately. There is a moment, just a moment between sleep and waking, where the body has not yet remembered what it is, where the weight of the day has not yet descended. He stays in that moment as long as he can, a few seconds, maybe less. Then the cow shifts in the darkness at the far end of the room, and the straw rustles, and the smell of dung and wet animal rises through the cold air, and the day begins. It has already begun without him. He rises from the sleeping mat, not a bed, not really, just compressed straw and a rough wool blanket that was his father's before him and will be his son's after, if the boy survives the winter, which is not yet certain. The fire in the central hearth has died down to a faint orange pulse, barely enough to see by. His wife is already awake. She never seems to sleep. Or perhaps she sleeps in a way he cannot recognize, with her eyes partially open, always listening. She is feeding the fire now, adding a piece of wood with the particular economy of someone who knows exactly how many pieces remain in the pile and exactly how many days remain until spring. She does not speak. He does not speak. There is no need. He pulls on his linen tunic, which has not been washed in 2 weeks, because washing requires time and water both, and neither is ever in surplus. The tunic is stiff with accumulated work, with salt from dried sweat, with the particular texture of fabric that has been worn and worn until cloth and skin begin to share a grammar. His outer wool garment hangs on a peg near the door, his best garment, though best is a relative word. It is whole, mostly. The patches on the left sleeve are tight and competent. His wife's work. She patches things with the same focus that some women bring to prayer. He is, by any reckoning, not old, 26, perhaps 27. The exact year of his birth was never recorded anywhere, because no one recorded the births of people like him. And yet, his body carries a history that does not match that number. The hands are disproportionate, thick-knuckled, the palms calloused in specific places that tell the story of specific tools. The hoe, the scythe, the wooden plow handle. The back does not straighten completely in the morning. It takes time, movement, coaxing. He has learned not to expect it to simply work. He negotiates with it. Outside, the village is waking in its particular way. The sounds arrive before the light, a dog somewhere 2 houses distant, the movement of animals, the low cough of an elderly man from behind a wall of wattle. This is a village of perhaps 30 households, built close together along a single rutted lane that turns to mud in the rain, and frozen ruts in the cold and dust in the dry months, each season presenting its own precise difficulty. The houses are low, dark inside, smoke-stained up near the thatch. They lean slightly toward one another, the way exhausted people lean. The village has no name in any official document. The Lord's records refer to it only by the name of the manor. The village is an afterthought in the accounting of power. He steps outside, and the cold is immediate and absolute. The sky is still dark but lightening at one edge, that specific shade of blue-gray that is not quite night and not quite dawn. The ground beneath his feet is frozen solid, and he can feel every ridge of it through his shoes. Not boots, but shoes, leather wrapped and stitched, sufficient for summer, insufficient for this. He crosses the small yard to the lean-to where his tools are kept. He does not think about where he is going. His body already knows. It went there yesterday and the day before and the day before that, back through seasons that blur together now, back to his father's time working this same ground, back further than memory can hold. This is what most people will never understand about his life. It is not episodic. There are no chapters. There is no before and after. There is only the continuous motion of survival, one action folding into the next, without punctuation, without rest that is really rest. What looks from a distance like a day is actually a single unbroken motion that happens to pause briefly in darkness. He is a villain. The word will not mean much in the centuries to come, when it shifts in meaning and loses its precision. But here, now, in this cold morning, in this unnamed village, in this particular century, the word contains a universe. A villain is not a slave. Not exactly. He cannot be bought and sold. But he is bound to this land, to this lord, to this soil, in a relationship that resembles ownership more than it resembles freedom. He cannot leave without permission. He cannot marry his daughter without paying a fine. He cannot grind his grain at any mill except the Lord's mill, and the Lord takes a portion of the grain for the privilege. He cannot fish the river that runs 50 yards from his door without specific dispensation, and that dispensation is unlikely. He holds the hoe in his hands for a moment before moving. There is something about the weight of a familiar tool that carries information the mind doesn't need to process consciously. The hoe tells him the season, the task, the particular resistance of this soil at this temperature. He knows this tool better than he knows most people. He knows exactly where the handle has been worn smooth, where it roughens slightly, where to grip it to spare his left thumb, which was crushed last autumn beneath a falling timber and has never quite recovered its feeling. What was he thinking about when the timber fell? Nothing. He was thinking about nothing. That is another thing most people will not understand. The mind in the middle of sustained labor does not go to grand places. It goes quiet. It manages the immediate. It saves its complexity for the moments before sleep, when the body is still and the thoughts arrive uninvited. The strip fields lie beyond the village to the east and to the west. His strips, and strip is the right word, long and narrow, impossible to own with the eyes, lie in two separate fields. The open field system means that no one works a single coherent plot. Instead, the land is divided into enormous fields, each field worked by the village in common, each family holding scattered strips throughout. It is a system of profound interdependence disguised as individual labor. To work your own strips, you are always surrounded by your neighbors working theirs. You cannot fail quietly. You cannot succeed alone. He crosses to the eastern field, where the winter wheat was sown in October, and where now, in the gray grip of late winter, the seedlings sit below a thin crust of frost. He is not here to harvest. He is here to clear, to move, to do the preparatory work that keeps him moving until the sun comes fully and brings what passes for warmth. There is a drainage ditch along the eastern edge that has partially filled with soil and debris, and water standing in a low section of the field, and standing water kills winter wheat as surely as drought kills summer crops. So he digs. The ground resists. He expected this. He applies weight through the handle, and the blade breaks the frozen surface crust and bites into the darker soil beneath. And the resistance is immediately a negotiation. How hard to push, when to let the tool do the work, when to use the hips rather than the arms. He has been doing this since he was 8 years old, working beside his father in fields that were, in that time, worked by his father's father. He learned the way animals learn certain things, by repetition that eventually becomes indistinguishable from instinct. He has eaten nothing yet this morning. This is normal. There is nothing unusual about beginning the hardest physical work of the day without food. The body has learned to run on its own diminished reserves, on the shallow fuel of bread eaten the night before, on the particular endurance that comes not from strength, but from the complete absence of any alternative to continuing. Somewhere behind him, a voice. The Reeve. The Reeve is a villager like him, was a villager like him, but appointed now by the Lord to oversee the manor's agricultural work. He is not quite lord and not quite peasant, occupying a middle position that pleases no one, including him. He is a man who has learned to carry authority like an uncomfortable garment, wearing it because it is necessary, aware that it changes how he is seen, aware that it has cost him something he cannot name. He tells him, and the words are brief, barely a sentence, that the Lord's domain land needs attention today before his own strips. There is a ditch on the Lord's field too, wider, more damaged, and it takes precedence. The Lord's work comes first. This is not a request. It is called week work. 2, sometimes 3 days each week, he must work the Lord's land before his own. Not for wages, not for food, for the right to hold his own strips, to live in his house, to exist within the system that governs everything. This is the fundamental equation of the feudal world: protection and land in exchange for labor and loyalty. It sounds, stated plainly, like a negotiation between parties. It is not. One party had the castle and the armed men and the law. The other party had no alternative. He follows the reeve toward the Damascene field. Behind him, his own strips remain unattended. His own drainage problem sits with the cold water still standing. The frost is still in the ground. His wheat is still in danger. He works. The morning opens slowly above him, the sky moving from gray-blue to a pale and unremarkable white. The sun, when it comes, offers light without warmth, a January sun, a February sun, doing its duty without conviction. He can see his breath. He can feel the specific discomfort of cold mud on his ankles, where his shoes gap slightly at the heel. He does not spend much thought on this. The body catalogs discomfort automatically and files it somewhere below decision-making. It becomes background. It becomes weather. There is a man working beside him named... well, it doesn't matter what his name was. He is young, newly married. His wife was just delivered of a child 2 months ago, and the child is alive, which is not something to take for granted. He is thin in a way that suggests this winter has been harder for his family than for some. His cheekbones are too close to the surface. He works with a kind of furious efficiency that has nothing joyful in it, just the efficiency of someone trying to finish a task so that another task can begin. They do not talk much. Talking burns something they cannot afford to burn. He thinks about bread, not abstractly, specifically. He thinks about the small, dark loaf his wife will have baked this morning if there was enough flour remaining, which there may or may not have been. He doesn't know for certain because he did not check before leaving, and this is one of the small calculations of a life where not checking is sometimes necessary because the answer might change what can be done today, and today's work cannot be changed regardless of the answer. The bread, when there is bread, is not the bread that those above him eat. It is rye bread or barley bread, or a bread made from a mixture of grains that includes pea flour when the grain runs short. It is dense and dark and filling in the specific way that necessity requires food to be filling. It is not pleasant. Pleasant is not a category that applies. It is fuel. He has eaten it every day of his life, except the days when there was nothing. There have been those days. He has not forgotten them. They are not the kind of thing that gets forgotten. There was a year, he was perhaps 14, when the harvest failed. Not completely, but significantly, by enough. The following winter was a subtraction, not a dramatic catastrophe, not plague or war, just the slow arithmetic of not enough. People grew thinner. Then some of them simply stopped. The very old first, then the very young. An equation of which the village never fully spoke afterward, the way you don't speak directly about certain things that happened in a room you still have to live in. He is still digging. The ditch is widening slowly, the dark earth piling on the edge. His arms are beginning to communicate their objection. He acknowledges it and continues. There is a church at the center of the village. There is always a church. It is the largest and most permanent structure in the village, built of stone, while Everything around it is built of wood and mud and desperation. The priest lives adjacent to it in a house somewhat larger than the other houses, and the priest is a man of complicated authority. He is the mediator between this world and whatever comes after. He is also, practically speaking, the person who records deaths and occasionally births, who counsels during illness, who says the words that are supposed to hold the darkness back. He believes what the priest tells him about God and salvation and the ordering of the universe. He believes it in the way that someone believes the ground beneath their feet, not as an intellectual position, but as the fundamental assumption upon which every other assumption rests. God made the world. God made the order of it. God made the high and the low and the in-between. To question this would not feel like skepticism. It would feel like losing the ground. But there are moments, and he would never speak them aloud, moments in the middle of labor when something else moves through him. Not doubt exactly. Something more like a question without language. Something that watches the Lord's penance on the distant manor house and watches the mud on his own shoes and finds the arithmetic difficult. Something quiet and irresolvable that he pushes back down because it has nowhere to go and because he cannot afford the luxury of what it might become if he let it grow. The sun is above the horizon now. He has been working for 2 hours on an empty stomach. His legs are solid with cold from the knee down, and he has stopped feeling the gap in his left shoe. The young man beside him straightens briefly, presses a fist against his lower back, says nothing, bends again. This is the world, not as abstraction, as this, as the specific gravity of a wooden handle in cold hands, as the precise discomfort of a half-frozen ditch in a field that belongs to someone else, as the distance measured in time rather than space between where he is and where he might eat. He does not know that in 200 years, give or take a generation, the world he inhabits will begin to change in ways that would be invisible to him if described. He does not know that the plague will come, or that wages will shift, or that the order he takes as permanent as sky will begin to lose its certainty. He does not know any of this. He knows the hoe, he knows the cold, he knows the particular sound of frost-hardened soil giving way. And somewhere behind him, 3 miles distant, sitting in a room with a fire and food prepared by hands other than his own, the lord of the manor is not thinking about him at all. This, more than anything, is what he does not yet understand about his own life. Not that he suffers. He knows that. Not that the system is unjust. He has no framework for that word, but that his suffering requires no malice. That the engine that runs his life runs on indifference. That there is no villain watching from a tower, calculating his misery. Just the field, just the work, just the cold, and the question that the ditch doesn't answer, that the bread won't answer, that even the church, with all its Latin weight and candle smoke certainty, has never quite answered to his quiet and wordless satisfaction. Whether a man who works this hard, who gives this much, who asks for so little, whether that man deserves what his life actually is. The ditch gets wider, the morning gets older, and he is still in it. The morning meal comes late and it comes small. His wife brings it to the edge of the field, not to the demi-aine field where he has been working, but to his own strips, where he has finally been permitted to move as the morning advances toward midday. She walks the distance from the house with the particular walk of a woman carrying something carefully, not because the container is fragile, but because the contents are finite. A cloth wrapped around a piece of bread, a small clay jar with a wooden stopper. She sets them down without ceremony at the edge of the strip, and he comes to them the way a man comes to water in a dry field, without rushing, because rushing would acknowledge a desperation he has learned to keep below the surface. The bread is barley. The jar contains a thin pottage, still faintly warm from the morning fire, made from dried peas and a small onion and water, and whatever scraps of flavor could be coaxed from bones that have already been boiled twice. He eats standing. There is no reason to sit. Sitting would make it a meal, and a meal would require time, and time is the one currency he is always already overdrawn on. She watches him eat. Not hungrily. She has eaten already, or says she has, and he doesn't ask further because asking further would force an answer he can't act on. She watches him with the particular attention of someone monitoring a machine they are responsible for maintaining, checking for signs of deterioration, checking that the fuel is going in. She is, by any reckoning of the world she lives in, a secondary figure. The legal documents of the manor, those that mention the peasantry at all, record her as his wife, identified by relation rather than by name. She holds no strips in the open field. She pays no tallage in her own right. She exists officially in the shadow of his legal personhood, which itself exists in the shadow of the Lord's. But in the actual architecture of survival, she is load-bearing in ways no document will ever record. She has been awake since before him. She will be awake after him. Between those two darknesses, she will have cooked, mended, fetched water from the well, tended the small kitchen garden behind the house, fed the pig they are keeping alive through winter on the slim hope of slaughter in spring, nursed the younger child through the cough that has been running through the village since November, and begun the process of producing tomorrow's bread. She does not do these things as a performance of duty. She does them because the alternative to doing them is not rest. The alternative is collapse. He finishes the pottage. There is a moment where the jar is empty and his hand is still holding it, and the hunger has been addressed but not resolved, only negotiated down to a lower register, the way pain can be managed without being removed. He hands the jar back to her. She turns and walks back toward the house without drama. This is their language. This is what love looks like when it has been working for years inside the confines of a life this narrow. Efficient, wordless, built from action rather than expression. He watches her go for a moment longer than necessary. Then he picks up the hoe. The afternoon work is his own, theoretically. The strips that bear his family's survival for another year are his to tend. And yet the word his sits uncomfortably in this context because the strips are not owned, not in any sense that the 21st century would recognize. They are held under specific conditions, subject to specific obligations, revocable under specific circumstances. He is a tenant of the earth he works, and the landlord is never entirely absent even when invisible. He moves along the strip with the hoe, breaking up the compacted surface between the winter wheat rows. The frost has made the ground a particular kind of hostile, not impossible to work, but resistant in the way that asks you to prove your seriousness. He proves it. The hoe rises and falls with a rhythm that is not mechanical, but not quite conscious either, something in between. The rhythm of a body that has found the most efficient path through a repeated motion and now executes it below the level of thought. What occupies the mind while the body works? This is a question worth pausing on, because the inner life of a man like this is the first casualty of how history remembers him. He becomes hands. He becomes function. He becomes a representative of a class, a data point in the agricultural records, an entry in a manor roll. The mind disappears. The self disappears. He becomes the peasant, lowercase and plural and interchangeable. But the mind is there. It is working. He is thinking about the pig. The pig is 7 months old, acquired last spring as a piglet from a neighboring village, kept through summer and autumn on scraps and acorns from the Lord's wood. The acorns gathered under specific permission for a specific fee, because nothing in this world is free. The pig has survived into winter. He has fed it through January on what could be spared, but February is longer than it seems, and the calculation is getting tight. If the pig is slaughtered too soon, the meat runs out before spring brings new food. If the pig is kept too long, it eats what the family needs to eat, and the pig is a pig. It doesn't feel that equation the way he does. He will probably slaughter it within the fortnight. The decision is already made in the way that necessary decisions are often made, not in a moment of choice, but by the slow foreclosure of alternatives until only one remains. He will salt the meat. His wife will render the fat. Nothing will be wasted. The feet, the organs, the blood, all of it will be used, preserved, distributed across weeks of eating with the careful mathematics of people who know that waste is a luxury of those who have enough to waste. The sun moves across the sky with a slowness that feels deliberate on cold days, as if the cold has thickened time itself. He works through the afternoon in the particular silence of outdoor labor in winter. Not a silence of absence, but of presence, of wind and frozen ground and distant animal sounds and the rhythmic percussion of the hoe against the earth. There are other villagers in the field. Some work nearby. There is a general low murmur of proximity, occasional words exchanged across the distance between strips, nothing sustained. He is aware of a man 3 strips over who owes him a day's help with thatching. The thatching happened in October, and the day of help has not materialized, and it is now February. This is not an extraordinary situation. It is the normal texture of village obligation, a web of mutual debt and assistance that holds the community together precisely because everyone is always slightly owed by someone and slightly owing to someone else. The web works. It also creates a low constant friction, small resentments that circulate without resolution, debts that are never quite collected and never quite forgiven. He won't say anything directly about the thatching. That's not how it works. Village social life operates at a remove from directness, through the management of implication and public reputation, through the slow accumulation of opinion that constitutes what people think of you. Calling out a debt openly creates an enemy. Letting it be known quietly that you are the kind of man who honors obligations and notices when others don't, that is a different kind of pressure, slower and more sustainable. But he notices. He always notices. The afternoon has a different quality than the morning. The morning's work is fueled by something that functions like urgency, the knowledge that the day is beginning, that the list of necessary things is long, that each hour matters. The afternoon's work runs on something darker, a kind of momentum that has no energy in it, but continues anyway, driven by the inability to stop rather than the desire to proceed. This is the hour when the body's complaints move up from background to foreground. This is when the back makes itself heard. He pauses briefly, not to rest, because rest would need to be justified, and he cannot justify it, but to check the sky. The sky in winter is a practical document. It tells you how much time remains, whether weather is coming, whether the temperature will drop further before dark. He reads it the way his father read it, with the same methodology and the same vocabulary of cloud shape and wind direction, and the particular gray that means snow is somewhere behind it. No snow today. Cold tonight. He returns to the strip. 3 more hours of light, perhaps less. In 3 hours, he will need to have done enough that tomorrow can begin at a different point in the list, not at the same point where today began, which is the test. Every day must end with some net gain of progress against the infinite backlog of a subsistence life. He will almost certainly not pass the test. There is something about this moment, mid-afternoon, mid-winter, mid-field, that contains the essential quality of his existence. Not the dramatic moments, not the feast days or the crises. This, the ordinary transaction of labor for survival, repeated without variation across a life that will not be recorded. The extraordinary endurance that looks, from the outside, like simple continuity. He has a son, 7 years old. The boy is in the village today, working at the kind of tasks children are given when the fields don't yet require them. Gathering wood, keeping the fire, minding his younger sibling who is not yet walking. 7 years old is not childhood, not in any sense that implies protection from labor. He is small and he is already working. By 12, he will be in the field regularly. By 15, he will carry the full weight of a working body's obligation. What does he want for the boy? The question is more complicated than it sounds, because what he wants and what he can want are different territories, separated by the walls of what is possible. He does not want for the boy to become a lord. That is not a thought he has. The distance between his family and the manor house is not measured in ambition or effort. It is structural. It is the way the world is arranged. He knows this the way he knows the shape of the field, not as a grievance, not exactly, but as a fact of landscape. What he wants, in the quiet, unspoken language of a man who has learned to compress his desires to fit the available space, is for the boy to be well enough, to eat, to find a wife, to work land and keep it, to survive his own winters, to not know the particular days when the pottage jar is empty and there is nothing to fill it with. That is the entirety of his ambition for his child, and it is not a small thing. It is the whole of what love can reach toward in a world this narrow. The sun begins its descent. The cold sharpens as it goes, the temperature dropping with the light in a direct and punishing correlation. He has been in the field since before dawn, with one brief pause for the pottage and bread. His feet lost their detailed sensation hours ago. His hands are working from a combination of muscle memory and determination that has long since decoupled from feeling. The hoe is heavier now, objectively the same weight it always was, but the cumulative exhaustion of 12 hours of physical work has changed the calculation between what the tool weighs and what he can lift. He is nearly done with this section of strip. Nearly. A word that does a great deal of work in a life like this. He hears the church bell from the village. It rings for none in winter. The afternoon canonical hour, a sound that organizes the day into its official segments, giving the formless labor a shape it doesn't actually have. The bell is ringing for God and for the ordering of devotion, but practically it is also a clock, a rough one. He calibrates against it. He has perhaps 2 hours of working light remaining. He works. And then, while the hoe is rising and falling, and the frozen ground is yielding in its specific reluctant way, something happens that is so small it might not seem worth noting, except that it is precisely the kind of thing that carries the weight of an entire interior life. He stops, not because he is tired, or not only because he is tired. He stops because something has crossed the edge of the field, small and quick, a hare moving along the border between the plowed land and the rough scrub at the field's margin. It runs with the absolute economy of a wild thing, a movement that has nothing to do with obligation or debt or the weight of accumulated hours. It runs because it chooses to run or because it doesn't choose, because its body has not learned the difference between necessity and desire, and so everything it does contains a kind of terrible freedom. He watches it until it is gone. Then he looks at the hoe in his hands, then at the strip ahead, then at the sky behind, where the sun is lowering through a band of pale gold that will not last, that is already leaving as he watches it. He does not have a word for what he feels in this moment. No one has given him vocabulary for it. But the feeling is real, and it is complex, and it involves, somewhere in its center, the hare's movement and his own stillness and the distance between them. Something that is not quite envy. Something that is not quite grief. Something that has no name in Latin or in the rough vernacular of his village, but that exists nonetheless, in the cold, in the field, in the precise moment before he raises the hoe again. He raises the hoe again. But he saw the hare. That is something. The light pulls back like a tide. The last strip of gold goes gray, and the gray goes dark at the edges, and the cold becomes a different animal at dusk, more aggressive, more purposeful. He collects his tools. His body moves through the returning to the village with the automatic knowledge of a man who has made this walk 10,000 times. The particular ruts to avoid, the place where the path slopes subtly and the ice collects, the gate at the edge of the common. Other villagers are returning too. They move in the growing dark like shadows that know where they are going, a collective retreat from the field to the warmth of the hearth, or what passes for warmth. There are few words. The end of the working day is not a social occasion. It is the next stage of a continuous process. He enters the house and the smell hits him first, smoke and dung and the residual warm animal smell of the cow at the far end, and beneath it, faintly, something cooking. His wife has pottage on the fire again. Different from the morning, or the same, reanimated with water and whatever else could be added. He doesn't ask. He sits near the fire on the low wooden stool and for a moment simply exists there, in the warmth, not performing anything, not producing anything. His son is beside the fire, very still, which is unusual. The boy is never still. He is watching his father with the particular attention of a child calibrating the mood of a room. He reaches out and puts a hand on the boy's head. The gesture is brief. It contains no language and requires none. The boy doesn't move, just leans slightly into the hand the way a plant leans toward available light. What neither of them knows, cannot know, is what this single gesture will mean in the chain of a life. Whether this boy survives to continue this land, whether his children's children will still work these strips when the world has changed in ways no one in this village can yet imagine. Whether this moment, this specific small warmth between a father's hand and a child's head, in a smoky room in a cold village in an unremarkable winter, whether it mattered, whether it counted toward anything. The pottage is ready. He eats. The fire burns. Outside, the village is dark and the cold is operating at full authority, and the field lies dormant under the beginning of a frost that will make tomorrow's work harder than today's, because tomorrow always finds a way to be harder than today. He will sleep before the fire dies completely down. He will be awake before the cold releases. He will do this again tomorrow. He will do this again the day after. He will do this until he cannot, and then someone else will take the strips. His son, if the boy is fortunate, someone else if he is not. And the field will continue regardless, indifferent to the specific hands that have worked it. But he does not think about that tonight. Tonight he thinks about the hair, the way it moved, the way the field looked behind it, wide and pale and still, the way the cold air tasted in that moment when he stopped and watched something living move through the world without weight. He doesn't know why he keeps returning to it, but he does. Even as the fire dims, even as the house settles into its night sounds, even as sleep comes up from the body's depths like water rising in a ditch. The hair, the open field, the strange, brief quality of that moment, and the hoe still rising after. There is something in that gap, between the watching and the returning to work, between the wanting and the doing, that contains the whole of what it is to be him. But he cannot see it yet. He is too close to it. He is inside it the way you are inside a life, where the shape of it is invisible because you are the shape. Tomorrow he will owe the Lord another day's work. Tomorrow the frost will be harder. Tomorrow the pottage will be thinner, because the winter is not finished and the provisions always run out slightly before the season does, as if the world itself is testing whether the margin can hold. But tonight, for a few more minutes before sleep, he is still in the field. He is still watching. The hair is still running. And the bell in the church tower sounds once through the dark, low and certain, counting nothing in particular, just marking that time is continuing, that the night is deep, that somewhere above the thatch and the smoke and the cold, the stars are arranged in their ancient patterns over a world that is turning slowly, carrying him with it, unasked. There is a kind of sleep that is not recovery. It is a suspension, A brief cessation of demand placed on a body that has no remaining capacity to respond to demand, and so it simply stops, the way a fire stops when there is nothing left to burn. He sleeps this way every night. Not deeply, not restoratively, in the way that people sleep when sleep is a pleasure rather than a biological emergency. He sleeps the way the land rests in winter, not restored, just paused, still carrying everything beneath the surface. He wakes once in the night. The fire has gone lower than it should, and the cold has advanced into the room with the confidence of something that knows it is winning. He rises, adds wood, stands for a moment in the dark, watching the flame rebuild itself from almost nothing. And something in this watching holds him longer than it should. The fire finding its way back from the edge. The specific orange and blue of it at the moment before it catches fully. He has watched 1,000 fires. He watches this one as if it is new. His wife does not wake, or she wakes and does not show it, which amounts to the same thing. He returns to the mat and lies down, and the sleep comes back without ceremony, and the night continues. When he wakes the second time, it is for the day. The cold is the same as yesterday, the same calculation at the same threshold, the same negotiation between the body's reluctance and the day's indifference to that reluctance. He dresses. He moves. He steps outside into a darkness that is absolute, except for the stars, which are very bright and very cold and very far away, and offer nothing except the confirmation that the sky has not changed. The frost last night was harder than the one before it. He knows this before he touches the ground. He can tell from the quality of the air, from the way his breath comes out in a plume that holds its shape longer than usual, from a particular stillness that deep cold creates, as if the world itself has ceased. He knows this the way he knows most things about weather and season, not from knowledge formally acquired, but from 45,000 days of accumulated observation compressed into reflex. His father knew it. His father's father knew it. The knowledge passes without language, through proximity and repetition, through simply being in the same world long enough to begin to read it. The ground is harder today. He knew it would be. But there is something else this morning. Something that breaks the pattern in a way the cold and the dark do not, because the cold and the dark are expected. He comes around the corner of the house and sees it. The small kitchen garden at the back, where his wife grows the onions and leeks and whatever else the season allows, is partially collapsed. A section of the wattle fencing that keeps the pig out of the garden has given way overnight, and the pig, more intelligent than it has any right to be, more intentional, has been in the garden, in the dark, while they slept. He stands and looks at it. The damage is not catastrophic. It is not a crisis in the way that a failed harvest or a sick child is a crisis, but it is damage, and damage in a life with no surplus is felt differently than damage in a life with margin. There is no extra. There are no replacement leaks that were being stored against this possibility. What the pig has taken is simply gone, and the gap it leaves in the winter's food will have to be closed somehow, from somewhere, or it will simply remain a gap. He looks at the pig. The pig looks back at him with the particular blankness of an animal that has no framework for culpability. It has been fed. It has found more food. From the pig's perspective, the night was a success. He repairs the fence. He does this before anything else, before his tools, before the field, using the pre-dawn dark and the cold and the last of his patience from the night before. His fingers on the wattle are clumsy with cold, the specific, graceless clumsiness of hands that have not yet been worked warm, and the repair takes longer than it should and is less solid than he would like, but it holds. For now, this is the texture of his life that history refuses to hold, not the dramatic arc of seasons, not the grand sweep of medieval agriculture, not the political arrangements of lord and serf. This the pig in the garden at 4 in the morning, the frozen fence, the fingers that don't work properly, the calculation performed instantly and wordlessly of what was lost and what it costs and where that cost will eventually be felt and by whom. By the time he reaches the field, the pre-dawn work has already taken something. Today is a Wednesday. This matters because Wednesday is one of the days of the week work obligation, the compulsory labor on the Lord's demesne that takes priority over everything his own life requires. He knew this was coming. He has always known it was coming. The week work is a fixed star in his calendar, immovable and reliable in the specific way that obligations imposed from above tend to be reliable. The demesne work today is plowing, or rather, preparation for plowing, breaking up the headlands at the ends of the great strips where the plow turns, where the soil compacts under repeated passage and becomes a different substance from the rest of the field. He will do this with a mattock, which is a heavier tool than the hoe, requiring more from the shoulders and less from the wrists. By midday, his shoulders will have made their position on this very clear. He is not alone in this work. 4 other villains from the village are here, similarly obligated, similarly silent in the early cold. There is an understanding between them that functions like solidarity without being called that, because the word doesn't exist in their language for this purpose. They share the work without dividing it formally, and they share information in the low practical way that people share information when information is survival. Which field the Lord's reeve seems most focused on today, whether the bailiff is expected to come through from the manor house, what the reeve said yesterday about the spring plowing schedule, what it might mean. The bailiff is the Lord's man, senior to the reeve, and his visits to the village carry a different weight. The reeve is of them, or was. The bailiff is from the manor, from outside, from the administrative machinery that converts their labor into the Lord's wealth. When the bailiff comes, the conversations change, the silences change. He is not expected today. This is the first piece of good news in 2 days, which tells you something about the frequency of good news. The mattock work begins. He settles into it with the kind of deliberate slowness that is actually a form of preservation. Not laziness, never laziness, but the management of output in a body that has finite reserves and a long day ahead. The difference between a man who lasts until dark and a man who collapses at midday is often this: not strength, not fitness, but the ability to calibrate output against duration, to spend yourself at the rate the day requires rather than the rate the urgency demands. He is very good at this. He has had to be. Beside him, one of the other men, older, thicker, with a beard that has been gray at the edges since before the younger man can remember, works in the same measured way. They have been side by side in this field for years. They have never had a conversation that could be called intimate, never spoken about the things that actually occupy the interior. And yet, there is a knowledge of one another that runs deeper than most conversations reach, built from this, from proximity in labor, from the shared reading of each other's bodies over years of work done side by side. He knows when this man is tired before the man knows it himself. He knows the specific way his pace changes when something is troubling him at home. He knows which tasks the man performs with more than the necessary care, not for the reeve's watching, but for his own interior standard, the private maintenance of dignity in a world that offers few other places to keep it. This morning he is working at a particular intensity that is not quite right. Not faster. Faster would be visible, would draw attention. But with a quality of pressure that is different, something going on behind the eyes. He doesn't ask. Later, perhaps, or not at all. Some things in a village circulate without being asked. The information will arrive when it arrives. The morning moves. The cold holds. His shoulders begin their account. There is a moment around mid-morning when the reeve passes through and pauses to observe the work, and the pause itself is a form of communication. The reeve is not speaking. He is watching, and watching in this context is a kind of language. It says the Lord's interests are present, that the work is being measured, that the quality and pace of what is being done is not invisible. He has learned to feel observed without showing that he feels observed, to maintain the same rhythm under the reeve's eye that he maintains without it. This is its own skill, less visible than the physical labor, but requiring its own form of effort. The reeve moves on. There is a release in the air after he goes that no one acknowledges. At some point in the late morning, the older man beside him says something. It is almost nothing, a few words, low and directed at the ground rather than at him, in the way that important things are sometimes said sideways in this world, not as declaration but as release. Something about his youngest daughter. Something about a fever that has been running since the weekend. Something about the priest being called. The priest being called. He hears this and continues working and says nothing for a moment. Then he says, "The fever breaks most times." The older man says nothing back. He nods once at the ground, at the compacted earth he is breaking with the mattock. Then he continues working. This is the entirety of the exchange. 3 sentences between them. And yet it carries everything. The fear, the helplessness, the appeal to probability in the absence of any other comfort. The acknowledgement between them that there is nothing to be done beyond this conversation, and so the conversation ends, and the work continues, because the work is the only thing that does not require them to sit with it directly. He thinks about the older man's daughter for the rest of the morning. He does not know her well. She is young, perhaps 5 or 6, one of those children who are simply present at the edge of village life, alive and moving, and not yet requiring much individual attention from anyone beyond their immediate family. He does not know what kind of person she is, what makes her particular, what she cares about or fears. He knows she exists. He knows that her existence is currently in question. He knows that this is a fact her father is carrying through the morning's work, like a stone inside his chest. He knows this because he has carried the same kind of stone. His youngest, 2 years ago, had a fever in the autumn that lasted 9 days. For 9 days the child burned, and he and his wife managed their terror in the same way they managed everything. By continuing to do what needed to be done, by not speaking the worst of it aloud because speaking it might give it permission to be true. By consulting the priest and by mixing the herbal remedies that passed between the village women, and by maintaining the absolute normality of the daily round, as if normality itself were a form of medicine. The child lived. 9 days and the fever broke, and the child lived, and he stood outside the house in the cold night and did not pray exactly, but said something to the darkness that was not unlike gratitude, directed at nothing specific, at the air itself, at the world for making a different decision than the one he had been preparing for. He still doesn't quite know what he was thinking. The older man's daughter might live too. Most fevers do break. Most children do survive the winter. The arithmetic of child mortality in this world is brutal in aggregate and survivable in individual cases, which is the only way people can continue to live inside it, by keeping the aggregate invisible, by focusing on this child, this fever, this possibility of recovery. But the aggregate doesn't disappear just because it's not looked at directly. He knows the aggregate. His own mother lost 3 before him. He has a sister who lived and a brother who didn't, and another who didn't, and another who almost didn't. The village itself has lost its shape over the years he can remember. Houses that stood when he was young are gone now, absorbed back into the village through the death of lines, through the failure of families to continue. The village is always rebuilding itself around its losses, the way the field closes over a furrow. The mattock rises and falls. By midday, the headlands are substantially improved, and the reeve has come back through once more, and this time there is a slight nod that functions as approval, or at least as the absence of criticism, which in this world amounts to the same thing. The men collect their tools and begin the movement back toward the village for whatever passes for a midday break. Not lunch, not a meal with any social dimension, just the ingestion of food before returning to work. He sits at the edge of the common and eats his bread and thinks about the afternoon. The afternoon will be his own strips again. The drainage problem is still only partially addressed. There is also a section of the strip where the soil has a particular compaction from last autumn's heavy rain, and this compaction needs attention before the spring plowing, which is still weeks away but approaches faster than it seems. The spring is the violent season, the season of maximum demand and minimum recovery, when the soil and the weather and the Lord's obligations all converge simultaneously into a period of sustained intensity that can leave a man hollow by midsummer. He is already thinking about the spring from inside February. This is what the life requires, a constant forward projection of necessity, a running calculation of what will need to be done, and in what order, and with what resources, performed continuously in the background of every other action. He is always simultaneously in the present moment's task and in the future's requirement. There is never only now. There is always also then. The bread is finished. He stands. Walking back to his strips, he passes the church, and the church exerts on him the particular gravity it always exerts. Not quite magnetic, not quite compulsory, but present. He doesn't stop. It is not Sunday. The weekday relationship with the church is one of proximity rather than participation. He passes it the way he passes any large and important thing in his landscape, aware of it, shaped by its presence, not stopping to examine either the shaping or the awareness. But today there is something at the church door. A figure sitting at the step in the way that certain figures sit at church steps in this world. Not a parishioner, not a priest, but someone in between. Someone from outside the village. A traveler, or what passes for a traveler in a world where most people travel very little, and those who do carry the visible marks of it on their bodies and clothes. A pilgrim, perhaps, from the staff and the worn nature of the clothing. Moving through on a route that touches this village incidentally, on the way to somewhere that has a greater claim on God's attention than an unnamed agricultural settlement in the middle of a cold February. He glances at the figure without stopping. The figure looks up. There is a moment of contact, eyes briefly, across the cold yard that carries something he cannot name. The traveler is somewhere between 40 and 60, with a face that has been outside in all weathers for a long time, and there is something in the expression that is not quite peace and not quite exhaustion, but something formed from both, something on the other side of a particular kind of long experience. Where has this person been? What have they seen? What does the world look like from a life spent in motion through it, rather than rooted in one narrow strip of it? He doesn't ask. He doesn't stop. He has strips to attend, and the afternoon light is not infinite, and questions of that kind are not things he allows himself to pursue, because pursuit requires time, and time is... He thinks this thought, and catches the repetition of it, and something in him registers that he thinks this thought very often, that time is always the closing wall, that the same limitation presents itself in different shapes throughout every day, that he is always running slightly behind the requirements placed upon him. He reaches his strips, he picks up the hoe, he works, but the traveler's face is still there inside his thinking in the way that unexpected images sometimes lodge in the mind's less examined rooms. Not obsessively, just present. The face of someone for whom the world had a different shape. The afternoon deepens. He is working the compacted section now, the soil yielding by degrees to the hoe's repeated argument. His back has moved from complaint to a kind of dull statement of position that he has learned to hear without acting on. His hands feel the familiar granular texture of working cold on working warm. the palms generating heat through movement while the fingers remain at the threshold of sensation. And then, this is the thing. This is the thing that happens this afternoon that will stay with him. He is working, eyes down, the hoe in its rhythm, and he breaks through a section of compacted soil to find beneath it a texture that is different. He knows immediately what it is before he looks. A layer of old ash, gray and fine, mixed into the darker soil, remnants of a fire from… when? Before him, before his father, before the village that stands here now, perhaps, people who burned something in this place before this place was what it is, before the strips were laid out, before the Lord held the land, before the system that governs everything arrived and imposed its geometry. He crouches and touches it. The ash is cold and dry, and it stains his fingertips. Someone was here. Someone lit a fire here. Someone lived in some relationship with this ground, before the ground became the specific thing it is now, before it was organized into obligation and strip and domain and commons, before it belonged to anyone in any of the ways it currently belongs. Someone was here, and they are not here now, and the only evidence left of them is this layer of gray ash beneath the soil, which no document records, which the Lord's rolls do not mention, which exists only because the ground remembered it when everything else forgot. He stays crouched for longer than he intended. What does it mean to leave only ash? To have lived so completely inside a life that the life consumed itself, left nothing above ground, pressed only this faint carbon signature into the earth below the plow line. He knows the answer. He lives it. He is the answer. He stands. He looks at the ash on his fingertips for a moment, then he wipes his hands on his tunic and raises the hoe and continues. But something has shifted. Very slightly, almost imperceptibly. A quality of awareness that sits alongside the work without interrupting it, a noticing of his own position in the sequence of people who have worked this ground, who have crouched over it, who have pressed their hands into it and stood again and continued. He is not the first. He will not be the last. Between the first and the last, the ground doesn't care. The ground accepts all labor equally, all hands, all ash. The ground will be here after the strips are gone, after the Lord's manor falls, after the specific system that organizes his life has dissolved into whatever comes next. He knows none of this. He cannot know it, but he knows the ash. He knows the feeling of it on his fingertips, and he knows, in the wordless way that the body sometimes knows what the mind can't reach, that he is part of a line, that he comes from somewhere and goes towards something, even if that something is only more ash, more depth, more gray silence beneath the soil. The hoe rises, the ground gives, the afternoon light thins, and in the village, at the church step, the traveler is still sitting, going somewhere, coming from somewhere, moving through the world with a freedom that belongs to neither the Lord nor the peasant, but to the road itself, which answers to nothing. He does not look back at the village. He works until dark comes. And the dark, when it comes absolutely. The dark comes in from the east first. It always does. It moves across the field like something with intention, like something that knows where it is going, and he watches it come while he is still working, while the hoe is still in his hands, because there is a specific quality to the last minutes of working light that he has learned to use completely, to extract the final usable minutes from the day, the way you extract the last of the fat from a bone, with attention, with patience, with the knowledge that nothing remains after this. He stops when he can no longer see the ground clearly. Not before. Never before. The walk back to the village is familiar in the dark, in the way that only very repeated things become familiar, not seen but known, the body navigating by accumulated memory rather than present perception. The ruts under his feet, the slight rise before the common, The smell of the village before he reaches it, wood smoke and animal, and the particular human density of 30 households breathing and burning and existing in close proximity through a winter night. He has walked into this smell 10,000 times. It is the smell of home. If home is understood not as a place of comfort, but as a place of return, as the place where the body knows it has arrived, inside the fire, inside his wife moving in the firelight with the efficiency of someone who has converted necessity into a form of grace, who has done this so many times that the doing of it has become its own kind of mastery, unwitnessed and unrecorded and no less real for that. The children near the hearth, the older one awake, watching him enter with the careful attention of a child who has learned to read the room before speaking into it. The younger one asleep already, the small chest rising and falling in the firelight, alive and warm. He sits. He removes his shoes. The feeling comes back into his feet in the specific painful way that returning circulation always brings, a burning that is worse than the numbness it replaces, and he bears it without comment because it is familiar and because there is no other option, and because in a few minutes it will pass. His wife sets the pottage before him. Tonight there is something in it beyond the dried peas, a small piece of salt pork from the reserves they have been rationing since January, added tonight for a reason she does not explain and he does not ask. It might be that she knows something he doesn't about the state of the provisions. It might be that she made a calculation about what the body needs after 2 particularly hard days. It might be that she simply decided, because small decisions are the only sovereign territory available to her, and she exercises that sovereignty without apology. The pottage is the best thing he has eaten in days. He eats it slowly, not to savor it exactly, but because his body is tired enough that eating quickly feels impossible. The jaw itself carries the weight of the day. Everything is slower. He eats and the fire burns, and his son is watching him, and his wife is moving quietly at the edge of the firelight, and the night outside is pressing against the walls of the house with the authority of deep winter. And inside there is warmth, and there is food, and there is this particular arrangement of people in a small room around a fire. And it is enough. Not in the sense of abundance, in the sense that it is what there is, and what there is here, and here is where he is. This is the moment the day has been working toward. Not as reward, not as resolution, just as endpoint, just as the place where the motion finally stops, and the body is permitted to be still. His son speaks. The boy asks something, asks where he went this morning before it was light, because the boy woke and he was gone already. And the question has been held all day in the way children hold questions, waiting for the right moment to release them. He tells the boy about the fence, about the pig. He tells it simply, without drama, the way you tell a child a true thing, when the true thing is ordinary, and the ordinary is enough. The boy listens with the absolute attention that children give to their father's words in worlds where father's words contain the knowledge required to survive. Then the boy asks, "Did you catch the pig?" And he looks at the boy for a moment, and something moves through him that is not quite laughter. He hasn't laughed fully in so long that the mechanism feels uncertain, but something adjacent to it, something warm and brief and involuntary. He says, "The pig was already where it was supposed to be." The boy considers this with great seriousness. Then he nods, satisfied, and says nothing more. The question has been resolved. The world makes sense again. His wife is watching from across the fire. She has caught the exchange. Something in her face shifts very slightly in the way that faces shift when they are not trying to show anything but show it anyway. The involuntary softening of someone witnessing something they needed to witness. Then she looks back at the fire. And this is all. This is the whole of the evening's intimacy, a child's question, a brief moment of warmth, a look exchanged across a fire. It is not nothing. In a life this stripped of excess, these moments are not incidental to the life. They are the life. The labor is what surrounds them. The labor is the structure that makes these small warmths possible, and also what threatens to consume them entirely, to take everything and leave only the work, only the obligation, only the body moving through its required functions until the body stops. He is aware, in the way that a man becomes aware of things in the stillness after a long day's motion, that this balance is not stable, that it has never been stable, that every year the line between managing and not managing is crossed somewhere by someone in this village, and that the crossing leaves a mark that the village carries forward but does not speak about directly. He has seen it. He has seen families come apart under the pressure of a bad harvest, has seen men become something harder and more frightening than they meant to become under the sustained weight of not enough, has seen women age past their years in the specific way that want ages people, not dramatically, not all at once, but by degrees, by the slow subtraction of reserves that were never sufficient to begin with. He does not want to become that. He doesn't know if wanting is enough to prevent it. The fire dims. He adds a piece of wood. The boy has fallen asleep near the hearth, curled on himself with the complete unconscious ease of a child who has not yet learned to carry the day into sleep, who can simply put it down and rest. He covers the boy with the edge of the blanket. The gesture takes 2 seconds. It is the most deliberate thing he has done all day. His wife sleeps, or seems to. The baby sleeps. The cow shifts in the straw at the far end, and the smell of it comes through the dark, and the fire burns down to its orange pulse, and he sits beside it for a few minutes longer than necessary, not thinking about anything specific, just being still in the warmth. This is when it comes, not loudly, not as vision or revelation or anything that would require a different kind of narration. It comes the way true things come to people who spend their lives too close to the immediate to examine it directly, sideways in the stillness when the guard is down and the body is too tired to maintain its defenses against its own deeper knowledge. He thinks about the ash, the layer of gray ash beneath the soil of his strip, left by someone who worked that ground before the strip existed, before the village existed in its current form. Someone who had no name in any record because records were not kept for people like that, like him. Someone who bent over that ground and stood again and continued, the way he bent and stood and continued, and who is now entirely gone, not dead in the way that important people are recorded as dead, with dates and causes and consequences noted, but simply gone, absorbed back into the ground, leaving only the chemical trace of a fire. He will be ash. He knows this, not as philosophy, as fact, as the plain destination of the body he currently inhabits, the body that aches from its shoulders to its heels right now, that is sitting beside a dying fire in a house that will probably not stand in 100 years, in a village that will not be named in the histories that are being written right now, somewhere, in Latin, by men who have never worked a field and never will. He will be ash, and the ground will close over him, and the strips will be worked by someone else, under some arrangement that may or may not resemble the current one. And the cold will come again the following February, and the work will continue, because the work is not about him. The work was never about him. He is the current instance of a requirement that predates him and will outlast him, and what he contributes to it is his body and his years, which are finite, and his silence, which is the greatest contribution of all. And yet, here is the thing that history will never record about him, because history records outcomes and not the interior processes that produce them. Here is what is actually happening in this man, in this moment, beside this fire. He is not broken. This is the hidden truth of it, the thing that is not visible from outside, not legible in the manor rolls or the agricultural surveys or the theological texts that describe the peasant as a necessary but bestial part of God's order. He is not broken. He has been bent profoundly and repeatedly by cold and hunger and labor and obligation and the sustained indignity of a life organized around someone else's wealth. He has been bent by grief and by fear and by the specific exhaustion of a body that has never been permitted to fully recover. He has been bent by the knowledge, always present, always managed, always pressed below the surface, that the system he lives inside was not designed for his benefit and does not require his consent. He has been bent by all of it. But in this room, in this dark, beside this fire, with his children breathing and his wife still and the cow shifting in the straw, he is whole, not healed, not comfortable, not at peace in any way that would satisfy a definition of peace, but whole, intact in some place that the system cannot reach, because the system is interested in his labor and his children and his grain and his fines and his obligations. But it is not interested in this, in the particular quality of his attention as he watches the fire, in the specific weight of his hand on his son's blanket, in the thing that moved through him when the hare crossed the field, in the gray ash on his fingertips and what he understood from it. The system cannot tax what it cannot see, and what it cannot see is precisely what makes him human in the fullest and most irreducible sense of that word. Not his productivity, not his obedience, not his function within the feudal order that uses him. What makes him human is this: the watching, the knowing, the feeling of things that have no practical application, the love that is too small to be visible from outside, but too large to be contained by the life that surrounds it. He has carried today from before dawn to this moment. He has carried 30 pounds of cold and 8 hours of labor and a pig in the garden and a traveler's face and a layer of ash and a hare crossing a frozen field and the older man's daughter burning with fever in a house 2 streets away. He has carried his son's question and his wife's silent economy and the particular taste of pottage with a piece of salt pork in it on a cold February night. He has carried the Lord's obligation and the reeve's watch and the bailiff's implied presence and the church bell measuring out a day that needed no measuring because it was already full past capacity. He has carried all of it, and he will carry it again tomorrow and the day after, and through the spring and into the summer and through the harvest and back into another winter, and the carrying will leave its marks on the body in the specific way that sustained labor marks a body: the hands, the back, the knees, the place where the shoulder doesn't move quite right, and eventually the marks will accumulate past the body's capacity to absorb them, and the carrying will stop, not because he chose to stop, but because the body will have simply given what it had to give. This is not tragedy. This is not heroism. This is not a story with a lesson at the end of it, a moral that redeems the suffering or explains the purpose. This is a life, specific, irreplaceable, unrepeatable, lived in full by a man whose name was never written down, in a village that the histories forgot, in a winter that has been over for 700 years. The fire goes to embers. He sits beside them until the cold begins to advance again, and then he lies down on the mat beside his wife and pulls the blanket, his father's blanket, his son's future blanket, over himself and closes his eyes. And the last thing in his mind before sleep is not the Lord, not the obligation, not tomorrow's work, though tomorrow's work is real and close and will arrive before dawn without announcement. The last thing is the hare, moving across the open field in the last light of a February afternoon, in a world that was cold and narrow and organized entirely against the freedom that movement implied. Moving anyway, moving with the complete commitment of a thing that knows only forward, only now, only the next moment of ground beneath it. He watched it go. That was enough. That was, in the fullest and most honest accounting of a life this stripped of luxury, enough to have seen it, to have stopped the work for 30 seconds and watched something move freely through a world that did not freely move, to have stood in the cold with the hoe in his hands and felt, briefly, the specific human ache of beauty, not the beauty of comfort or abundance, but the beauty of a wild thing crossing a frozen field, which costs nothing and belongs to no one and cannot be taxed or obligated or taken. He saw it. He put it somewhere inside himself that the cold couldn't reach. And now he sleeps. Outside, the village is dark and still. The frost is working on the ground, hardening it for tomorrow, making the work harder in the way that tomorrow always finds a way to make the work harder. The church stands at the center of it all, stone and certain, its bell silent now, its God presumably present and presumably watching, though what is made of the watching is a matter the living and the dead have never quite resolved. The field lies under the stars, his strips among the others, the winter wheat beneath the frost, alive in its particular winter way, not growing, not resting exactly, but holding, keeping its potential intact against the spring, refusing to be finished by the cold. Somewhere in the dark beyond the village boundary, something moves, an animal, or the wind, or nothing, just the sound the night makes when it is deep enough to have its own texture, just the world continuing its motion without waiting for permission. And in a house in an unnamed village, a man who worked this ground and loved his children and watched a hare cross a frozen field and touch the ash of people who came before him. This man sleeps. He will wake before dawn. He will be cold. He will rise. And the question that hangs over all of it, the question that 700 years of distance does not resolve, that no amount of historical record or agricultural data or feudal theory can finally answer, is not whether his life was hard. It was hard, beyond the reach of any comfortable imagining. The question is this: whether a life can be fully human inside conditions designed to reduce it, whether dignity survives where it is never formally permitted, whether the watching of a hair, the hand on a child's head, the gray ash on cold fingertips, whether these small, invisible, untaxable moments of interior life constitute something that the system could not take, whether the fact that he felt things, felt them precisely, felt them in the cold, felt them while the hoe was rising and falling, and the reeve was watching and the obligation was unending, whether that feeling was enough to make him free in some sense that the manor rolls could never record and the Lord could never own. He believed it was. He never said so. He had no language for it and no one to say it to, and no tradition of saying such things that reached down to where he lived. But the belief was there, pressed into the way he watched the fire rebuild itself at 4 in the morning, into the 30 seconds he gave the hare before returning to work, into the 2 seconds of his hand on his son's blanket that were the most deliberate thing he did all day. The belief was there, and now he sleeps, and the frost deepens, and the field holds its breath, and somewhere in the dark, the hare is still running.